Hey, good morning, everyone. This is People of Substance by LemonSkies, and I'm thrilled to welcome my guest today, Jessi Marsh. We'll cover a lot of ground. We'll cover her nonprofit journey. We'll talk about resilience. We'll talk about what it's like to step into first-time CEO role. Jessi, please say hello and introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. I'm so happy to be here, and it's great to finally actually meet you, Olga. I feel like we've run in the same circles for a long time and have so many mutual friends. So it's a pleasure to get to spend some time with you today.
Yeah, I hope you never meet me in person and say to me, "You're shorter than I expected." So that's the only caveat there.
People think I'm short on this too, and then they meet me, and I'm not super tall. I'm 5'7", but people always think I'm short. I'm not.
Yeah. So let's just jump right in. So you and I were chatting about nonprofit sector. Did you intend to be a nonprofit professional, or is this something you stumbled into?
So I was a journalism major with an emphasis in advertising management. So I was essentially deciding to either be a creative, like a copywriter, or a account manager in advertising, or possibly public relations. I had a little bit of, I had a few classes in that as well. And that was really what I had every intention of doing. And upon graduation, I was interviewing in New York at some agencies, at some television stations, MTV, notably. Comedy Central was another one. And I really thought that's what I was going to do, move to New York and work somewhere like that. But I volunteered at a homeless shelter when I was in college, and the executive director and I had a meeting, and he asked me to consider staying in my college town and working there. And I said, no, absolutely not. Thank you, but no. And then I went home and couldn't sleep. So about 3 days later, I just thought, I have to do this, don't I? Like there was just something about it that was kind of pulling me to do that. And so that was in the year 2000. And I've been in nonprofit in one way or another the entire time since then.
Yeah, so it was pretty much right away. You kind of gave up on your Carrie Bradshaw dreams and decided to do good work.
But I did end up working for an agency in New York years later, but it was a fundraising agency. So it all came back around.
Full circle.
Yeah.
So you had an experience doing some pretty neat things as part of your nonprofit journey, including traveling to a pretty far destination, at least so I'm hearing. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. It's about as far away from where I live as you can get, I think. So I worked for Dickerson Baker, which is an amazing fundraising agency. And my friend Andrew Olson hired me, and it is one of my favorite jobs I've ever had working there, just with some of the top fundraising talent in this country, I would say. So not long after I started working there, we had acquired a new client, and they really wanted us to understand their work and observe it at the ground level. And so they did a lot of work throughout the world, but specifically India. And so we traveled there, and quite a journey, quite a long time to get there. But we actually spent time in 3 different regions of India. We were in New Delhi, Lucknow, and the Kerala region. And the Kerala region is way at the bottom, and it's where like Rudyard Kipling wrote about, the Jungle Book, children's book that was kind of inspired by his time in the Kerala region. So we spent time in the jungle down there. We visited places that, you hear about almost in a mythical way. So for example, we visited a leprosy colony. So a place where people who have leprosy live. And, when I tell this story, I have to tell people, yes, people still get leprosy. There's something like 200,000 cases of leprosy worldwide that happen annually. There are treatments for it. It is not as contagious as you think it is. But it is a severe illness. And in places like India, there's a significant stigma to it. So that is why people are kind of cordoned off into communities that are primarily for people diagnosed with leprosy and their children. So we visited a place like that. Some of the work that our client did was essentially taking care of people like that who had been shunned by their families. They also build homes for widows, because a lot of times when a man dies, there's a strange stigma that almost like it was his widow's fault, or that she's cursed in some way. And so they kind of get excommunicated and they have to live. A lot of times the widows will live together down by a river, and they can, all they can do really is beg. So this organization builds small homes for them, gives them a small piece of land, a cow, a goat, some seeds to kind of get started. And then once they just have those few things, they can really sustain themselves pretty easily. They also provide clean water. So we got to see, what the difference is between, trying to drink water out of a stagnant, pond versus these water filters that they can provide for very cheap, that makes the water like 99.999% free of bacteria. So we got to see all of that work. We visited the slums outside of Lucknow, which is kind of a tough experience to see, people living just in shacks and millions of people. I've worked in organizations that serve the homeless for many years, and I've been to homeless encampments here in Pittsburgh, out in LA. And there's just nothing like the slums of India because they're so vast. There are so many people. People are born there, they live their entire lives there, and they die there, and they never really know anything else, because they're not even considered to be part of the caste system. They're below the beginnings of the caste system. So they're just not considered by anybody else in the culture to be, human. So it was emotional, it was inspiring, challenging. Being a kind of tall, blonde, white lady in India is an interesting experience because they don't get too many people that look like me around there. So I got a lot of stares and a lot of people that wanted to take my picture, take a picture with me, which was kind of funny. I say I got to feel like Taylor Swift for a couple of days, because someone that looks like me is very unusual there.
Wow. That sounds remarkable. So what was the most memorable moment of your journey?
I would say when we were at the leprosy colony, there was a little boy there whose mom had been diagnosed with leprosy, and he was a baby when they came there. And even though he does not have leprosy and probably will not get leprosy, the only type of person that he would be allowed to marry is a child of another person with leprosy, because no one else would marry the child of a leper. And so this little boy was so adorable and so happy and sweet, and he has a stigma against him as well, just because of, a diagnosis that his mother has that he does not have, almost certainly will not get. But that type of thing in a place like that, where the culture views this disease in that way, that his future prospects are just completely different than what they would be in other places in the world.
Wow. Well, let me switch gears and kind of talk a little bit more about you. And we were chatting ahead of this, and just the whole notion as leaders, as nonprofits, and experiencing something like that. I'm sure that's very emotional and very challenging in many ways. Can you talk a little bit about resilience and the role it plays? Resilience what role has it played in your own journey to getting you to this point?
Sure. So I do think resilience in this line of work is important because you're exposed to a lot of difficult things, a lot of sad things, a lot of traumatic things. And I think because of some of the life experiences I've had, I'm kind of built for it. When I was 9 years old, I walked out of the front door of my house, and I had a babysitter with me in the mornings. And she went down to the bottom of the driveway in case the school bus came early. And we actually had a barn with 2 horses in it. And I had to leave a little bit early that day. My father had left a note for us to leave 5 minutes early so that I had time to go and let the horses out. So my babysitter went to the bottom of the driveway and I went back to the barn. And while we were both away from the house actually exploded with absolutely no warning. So when I was 9 years old, I lost pretty much everything I owned. The house was on fire by the time I came around the corner. And it was really incredible, the fact that we survived, because we walked out of the house. And even if I had left the barn a moment earlier than I would have been walking next to the house when it happened. So it was really pretty miraculous. And so I went through this experience where, something totally unexpected happens that's really scary. But then you also lose everything and you have to move. And so that all happened when I was 9. And it was very upsetting for a time, but I learned so much from it. I learned that your family can pull together and become closer through something like that. I learned that things don't really matter. Like, my daughter will lose something and I'm kind of like, whereas she, hasn't had an experience like that, thankfully. I have. And so I just don't get too caught up in the value of like physical things, because I know what it's like to lose them. I know that they can either be replaced or simply remembered. So that's kind of the first thing that I think kind of changed me or gave me, an element of resilience. But then when I was 35 years old and the mother of a 3-year-old at the time, I was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer, which is a really scary diagnosis. At one point in my early diagnosis and beginning to talk about my treatment, one oncologist essentially told me that I had a 13% chance of being alive in 5 years. So those were not very good odds to hear. So I fired that oncologist and found somebody who I felt like really believed in me. And together, we are still here. How many years later? 11 years later now. So I did have to fight cancer for about 5 years. It ended up coming back in my liver and then in my left lung. And, that is a really, really scary one when you have a 3-year-old. And, the only thing that I can talk about it now, but for a long time, the thing that I still couldn't talk about was how it felt to think about having a 3-year-old and that I might not be here to watch her grow up. Like, I remember, the song, You Are My Sunshine. I used to sing that to her. And I ended up getting this book that was a recording book. And so I wanted to record me singing You Are My Sunshine in case I died, so that she would have that book and have my voice in it. And there is nothing that I've ever done in my entire life that was more difficult than getting through that song, because all I could think about was me not being here and her being sad and, reading this book. So that was terrible. And I'm so incredibly thankful that I am still here. I don't really sing that song to her anymore.
I imagine that song triggers all sorts of emotions. And
it does. If it comes up in a movie, I'm like, oh, but there is so much. I mean, it's like, we're supposed to be grateful for the bad things we went through. And sometimes I think that's a little bit, I don't know, overdone. People talk, but, because it sucks too. It's really hard. And, half my hair fell out and I didn't know if I should shave my head or just look ridiculous for a while or wear hats. I was sick for a really long time. I felt awful. I worked the entire time. I didn't want to leave my job because I kind of felt like that would be like giving up. And so I was like, I just got to keep going. But it was very, very difficult. But that being said, I am extremely grateful for the things that it has given me in terms of my ability to empathize with what people are going through. I want people to call me. Like, if they're a young mom and they've been diagnosed with cancer, I want them to call me, because one, I'm a happy story, because people love to tell you about their neighbor that died of the thing that you just got diagnosed with. I had to stop people after a while, I don't want to hear those stories. No, thank you. And so one, I'm a happy story. So I think I give people hope. But two, I know what it's like. I really, really do. And, I can make some recommendations about some things that I think are helpful that make, the adventure a little early or a little easier. Um, so yeah, I'm grateful because there are a few things I cannot relate to that someone has gone through at this point. So that's what those experiences have given me, the resilience as well as the ability to relate and empathize. And I think that we're just better the more we can empathize.
So I think the fair takeaway here, yes, it gave you resilience, but you probably could have gone without this particular experience.
Probably, but we'll take it. We're here now, right?
Yeah. So Jessi, you're a first-time CEO stepping into a role at the Will Allen Foundation in Pittsburgh. What is that like? You're pretty freshly minted one. So what has been the most exciting, the most challenging? What has the experience been like for you?
Yeah. So yesterday was 1 month in. So it is very new. And I'm really honored to lead this organization. The name is a bit of a misnomer because it is a service providing nonprofit versus a foundation that gives funds away. So we do fundraising rather than funding. But it is an amazing youth organization that's really focused on workforce development and, preparing kids for the future. We call it life readiness. And so, there are a lot of opportunities and resources that kids from some neighborhoods have, and we work in the neighborhoods where kids don't typically have those things. So providing things like supplemental STEM education, robotics specifically is something that we offer a lot of, health and wellness programming. And then some fun things like, backpack giveaways and Christmas gift programmings to provide gifts for kids that their families can't necessarily afford it. So it's a great organization, very passionate, talented team. And anytime I enter a new opportunity, a new job, I learned something a long time ago from a colleague of mine who was an immigrant from Colombia when he was a teenager. And he went on to achieve a lot of things, but one thing that he was an officer in the Marine Corps. And something that he learned in the Marine Corps that he passed along to me that I thought was really wise, and I've just taken it everywhere I've gone, is that in the Marine Corps, as an officer, you might get moved to a different group that you're in charge of, and you don't know any of these people. This is a brand new place. And so he said that the way the Marines do it is you don't really change anything for the first 30 days. And that is something that I've really taken to heart. And I do understand the temptation. Like you see and you're like, oh, we're not going to do that anymore. And oh, we're going to do this now. But working that way, and not that you don't implement any changes, sure. There are some things that need to be done. But for the most part, you're observing and you're trying to understand. You're asking a lot of questions, because I think the thing I've learned through doing this for the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years is that if you give it a little bit of time and you ask the right questions, you'll discover that nothing is done for no reason. There's always a rationale for it. Now, it may not be the optimal thing for this time in this place, but there's a reason why someone did that. And even if it doesn't fit now, there was a good reason at the time. And I think that's an aspect of leadership that I think is really, really important, like respecting what has gotten us to here and not just dismissing it at go because you don't think it's, the best thing to be doing right now. So I'm a person of action. I like to activate things. And so I have to kind of pull myself back a little bit and be a little bit more patient and give myself that time to observe and ask the right questions so that I really do understand the situation before I start messing around and changing things. So that's one thing about my approach. I think the other approach is, you start immediately kind of thinking about strategy, right? Like, what is the strategy here? Is there a strategic plan? Is it still relevant? how are we going to address that? And of course, we all know the famous quote that culture eats strategy for breakfast. So for me, addressing the culture is really important, and that needs to happen before you start working on strategic planning. And so just recently did an exercise with the team where we kind of talked about current state of culture, what are observations about, the values, beliefs, behaviors and practices that kind of comprise our culture. What are those things that we're currently doing? And then as we start to think about future state, like aspirational state, what do we want to be? What do we want it to feel like? What do we want it to look like? And so we just had a really good conversation about that recently, kind of starting the process of building an intentional culture, because culture is going to happen and you can either like drive it or you can sit there and watch it. And I would prefer to, collaboratively with the rest of the team, drive it toward what we want it to be. So that's been an interesting conversation. But then what I always say about, culture eats strategy for breakfast, I think relationships eat culture for lunch. And so you have to, start to build relationships with people and, get to know them as humans, understand their why, what makes them tick, why did they want to do this kind of work, what's their connection to the mission, how do they approach the work, what excites them, what is tedious to them. So that's kind of in the first 30, 31 days. That's where I'm at with it right now.
I love that. Culture eats strategy for breakfast and relationships eat culture for lunch.
Yeah. I think that's accurate.
Small fish, little fish.
What's that?
It's like big fish, little fish.
Right. Exactly. I just think that that's the order, right? Like strategy is so important. We spend so much time on it, but if we don't address the culture, it won't work. If we don't have the relationships, the culture is going to be, irrelevant.
Yeah, that's a great one. So to kind of shift gears to something a little bit more fun, we're going to take a little unusual take here. I have observed, so you live in Pittsburgh.
I do.
You're from Pittsburgh area.
Yes. I've lived other places, but we call people who leave Pittsburgh and come back boomerangs. And I was away for about 10 years.
Okay. And I have observed that people who are from Pittsburgh really love being from Pittsburgh. I don't know what you call somebody from Pittsburgh.
A yinzer.
A what?
A yinzer.
Yinzer. Okay. That was not my guess.
I will explain that.
So let's start with that and learn a few things about Pittsburgh.
Okay. I would love to be like Pittsburgh's ambassador to the rest of the world. And I think that because I've lived other places, and I lived in Ohio, I lived in Maryland, I lived in Seattle, Washington, I lived in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And I loved all of those places, but I love Pittsburgh the best. And I really do think it is an amazing place to live for so many reasons, from it becoming really an art and food and drink culture center, being very affordable to live here. If I told you how much houses cost here, especially where you die. What you could get here for what you could get there is just incredibly different.
And the interview is over, Jessi.
Pardon?
And the interview is over, just like that.
I will. I'll tell you. So here's some fun facts about Pittsburgh. So starting with yinzer. So if you don't know that term, you can call somebody from Pittsburgh a Pittsburgher. That's perfectly acceptable. But there is a particular word that people say here. So in the South, they say y'all, right? And in Philly, they say yous. Mm-hmm. And the equivalent in Pittsburgh is yins. Y-I-N-Z. Yins. And it is used ubiquitously. People, if you know how you can kind of get the feel for a dialect of a place by whoever they interview on the news, that when something crazy just happened across the street. So you get like the neighbor, and they're telling, well, I was washing the dishes and then I heard it, and that that kind of thing. And whatever that interview is in Pittsburgh, it is going to be the most yinzer person. So it's a dialect, and it's both words that are uniquely used here So I'll give you some examples. You know the word nosy, like if you're overly curious about someone, for some reason that word in Pittsburgh is nebby, Nebby. We don't know why. That's just what it is. Quit being nebby. Your mom would tell you if you were like trying to eavesdrop on her and her friend, you would get yelled at for being nebby. Cleaning up a room is called redding up. Go red up your room. A jerk or a person that we don't like is a jagoff. They say that in Philly too, so that's not totally exclusive to Pittsburgh, but people do use that word a lot in Pittsburgh. So those are some of the words. The accent I really can't do. I mean, I probably can, but it's there's a like downtown. The way you would say it in Pittsburghese is downtown. It's very much not enunciated. And when I moved to Ohio to go to college, I was informed for the first time in my life that I had an accent. I did not know I had an accent. And I tried very hard to adopt the Midwest newscaster accent so that nobody thought I was weird. And you know, if I'm out with friends and having a glass of wine, you might hear a little bit of the Pittsburghese, you know, dialect come out. But for the most part, I try to enunciate so that I don't sound like a Ginzer. So that's Pittsburghese. Some kind of odd or fun facts about Pittsburgh. We have more bridges than Venice. There are many, many, many bridges here. Sometimes it's called the city of bridges. So we have 3 rivers, and the Monongahela River and the Allegheny River converge to meet at Point State Park, which is like the tip of the city of Pittsburgh. And so if if you're watching a Steelers game and they do that little helicopter aerial shot, you usually see the rivers, and where they converge, that makes the beginning of the Ohio River. But another interesting fact about Pittsburgh is that there's actually a 4th river that runs underneath the others. And so there's this underground river that people talk about, which I don't even know. How do you like discover that there is a river underneath another river? Who knows? But so apparently there's a river that not that many people know about. Another phenomenon kind of exclusive to Pittsburgh is the Pittsburgh left. So I've had people who've never been here before be in a passenger in my car and literally shriek when this happens because it's so unexpected. So pretend you're at a red light and you're going to turn left. And there are other cars here. You're all waiting, right? And there's no arrow. No arrow. That does not apply here. The light turns green. If you're first in line, you can go first and make the left ahead of the traffic coming. So it's like this little courtesy that you do, that if you're in the regular traffic going straight and you see someone coming from the other direction that wants to make a left in front of you, you let them. And it's really funny, though, if you're the driver and you're making a Pittsburgh left, people think you're trying to kill them. And it's like, no, it's okay. We all know, like, this is how it works. So the Pittsburgh left can seem very dangerous, but for the most part, it's very safe. So that's one that has definitely kind of shocked people from out of town. And then the last one I'll tell you about is kind of funny. So a lot of people live in neighborhoods in Pittsburgh where there's no off-street parking. So you just have to find a parking space. So when it snows, what happens is people who have that kind of situation, like maybe they live in a house that just has stairs going up to it. They like to park right outside, of their house. So they will shovel out their spot when it snows. And then you put a chair there, and it's called the Pittsburgh parking chair. And no one is allowed to touch it. If someone were to move your chair and park their car there, like the entire neighborhood would probably like vandalize the car. Like you cannot do that. So it's just like an unspoken, very respected thing that if there is a chair there, no one will be parking there.
Wow.
You shoveled out the spot, so it's yours.
That's tough crowd, I tell you. I'm not sure I'm prepared for that. Huge fan of Andy Warhol Museum.
Yes, it's an amazing museum to visit, and they do a lot of cool stuff with art education for youth in the area, but it's a unique and beautiful museum for sure.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites.
The
Well,
Silver
just
Cloud Room, did you get to go to the
yes,
Silver
I
Cloud
did.
Room? That's
Mhm.
my favorite, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a great collection. I think it's the biggest one. So, Jesse, it was so wonderful to have you on. It's so interesting to hear, and I learned way more about Pittsburgh than I think I walked in expecting. So, I will definitely be asking for tour guides.
Come and visit. You do need a tour guide here. It's a
Clearly.
city where you gotta have a local that shows you around and, knows how to do the Pittsburgh
Keep
left.
you from dying. Mhm. So there's that. Well, thank you very much for being on, and I appreciate getting to know you, and I appreciate just this new phase of your life, and just look forward to cheering for you.
Well, thank you for having me, and I loved meeting you and getting to spend a little bit of time together.
See you soon.
Thank you.